Let them talk. Let them doubt. But let them watch too. Because you're rising. Not quietly, not secretly, but boldly, fully, unapologetically. You are the evidence that pain doesn't get the final word. You are the living proof that what tried to bury, you forgot. You were a seed. Now grow. Now roar. Now rise. Because when you rise, generations shift. Legacies are rewritten. And heaven celebrates. This is not just a conclusion, it's your commission. So go, walk like royalty, speak like prophecy, love like war, build like legacy. Because the world is waiting for the woman who finally remembered she was always sacred. Before you wore the title, before they put CEO next to your name, before the awards, before the applause, before anyone even knew your name, you were sacred. You were valuable. You were worthy. Not because of what you could do, but because of who you already were. This culture has lied to you, making you think that your worth is attached to your productivity. That if you're not grinding, hustling, winning, performing, then somehow you're not enough. But I came to break that lie. I came to tell you, your sacredness was sealed in the heavens before your resume was ever written. Think about a newborn baby. That baby hasn't accomplished anything yet. Hasn't won a trophy, hasn't made a dollar, hasn't spoken a word. But when we look at that baby, we're in awe. We protect it, we celebrate it, but when we look at that baby, we're in awe. We protect it, we celebrate it. Why? Because it's sacred. Its value isn't earned, it's inherent. So why do you think yours isn't? Let me talk to the woman who's been running herself into the ground trying to prove she matters. Burning the candle at both ends. Working a job and a side hustle. Raising kids and battling quiet depression. You think you're only as valuable as your performance? But what if I told you, even if you sat down, even if you rested, even if you didn't do one more thing, you would still be enough? There's a sister right now who's looking at her life and feeling like a failure. She didn't get the degree. She didn't start the business. She didn't lose the weight. And now she walks with her head down as if her sacredness expired because her timeline didn't match the world's expectations. I need her to hear me. You were sacred before success. You were sacred in the setback. You were sacred in the divorce. You were sacred in the bankruptcy. Your sacredness wasn't shaken. Your situation was. But you're still holy ground. We've been conditioned to chase validation from broken systems, likes, follows, promotions, applause. But none of that fills the void when you've forgotten who you are. You can be the most followed woman in the room and still feel like a fraud when the lights go out. Ask the influencers who are drowning in anxiety. Ask the businesswomen who cry in the car after board meetings. Ask the pastors' wives who smile on Sundays and sob on Mondays. Success doesn't silence the whispers of unworthiness. Only truth does. And the truth is, you are sacred now, just as you are. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman who worked at a hotel as a cleaner. She cleaned rooms for years, quietly, faithfully, never seen. Guests would walk by her like she was invisible. But one day a little girl lost her bracelet, a family heirloom. That cleaner found it, tracked down the guest, and returned it. That small act led to a conversation which led to a promotion, which led to her managing the very hotel she once cleaned. But here's what she said in an interview later. I wasn't more valuable when I got the title. I was always valuable. The world just finally saw what I always was. The world just finally saw what I always was. And the world just finally saw what I always was. The world just finally saw what I always was. The world just finally saw what I always was. The world just finally saw. The world just finally saw. You don't become sacred after you succeed. You are and always have been sacred. When God formed you in your mother's womb, he said, she is mine. She is worthy. She is set apart. No diploma could increase it. No mistake could decrease it. Think about the woman at the well, shamed by society, defined by her past. But Jesus sat with her, talked with her, gave her living water. Not after she cleaned up her life, not after she became respectable. No, he met her as she was, because her worth was never tied to her record. It was tied to her identity as a daughter. Or think about the single mother who's juggling 2 jobs, taking the bus to work, missing meals so her kids can eat. Society doesn't see her. She's not successful by the world standards. But heaven sees her grind. Heaven calls her sacred. Not because she's perfect, but because she's divinely designed. Every sacrifice she makes, every tear she sheds, it matters. Not one moment of it is wasted. She is walking, living proof that sacredness lives in sweat, not just spotlight. We've got to stop letting titles define us. You're not just a wife, not just a mother, not just an employee. You are a woman of sacred worth, with or without the labels. You carry the fingerprints of God himself. That breath in your lungs, sacred. That heart that still beats despite the pain, sacred. Don't wait for someone to affirm you. Don't wait for the job. Don't wait for the relationship. Don't wait for the mirror to lie kinder. Look at yourself now and say, I am sacred. I am worthy. I am whole. I may not be where I want to be, but I am not who I used to be. And I am still his masterpiece. You were sacred when you were struggling. You were sacred when you were stuck. You were sacred when you were suicidal. You were sacred when you were silent. You were sacred when you were searching. You were sacred before you even knew how sacred you were. Sacredness isn't lost, it's just buried. Buried beneath the rubble of rejection, buried beneath the weight of disappointment, buried under labels that were never yours to carry, buried under generational pain and unspoken trauma. But just because something is buried doesn't mean it's gone. A seed is buried, not to die, but to bloom. Your worth, your brilliance, your voice, it's still there. It may be silent, but it's not surrendered. It may be hidden, but it's not hopeless. There's a woman who used to sing every morning. Her house would light up with her voice. But somewhere between raising kids, losing her job, and going through a divorce, the singing stopped. She didn't even notice it at first. One day, her daughter asked, "Mama, why don't you sing anymore?" And she stood frozen, not because she couldn't, but because she had forgotten she could. That voice, that joy, that freedom, it wasn't gone. It was buried beneath fatigue, stress, and survival. She wasn't broken. She was just buried. A young girl who loved to paint, always scribbling colors on the back of notebooks. She had dreams, but because she had buried debt down deep, that voice, that voice, that voice, that voice. And when she heard herself sing beautifully, she realized she could. So she became an accountant. Years passed, she didn't touch a brush. Then one day, at a local fair, she saw a little girl painting a butterfly with wild colors. Messy, chaotic, beautiful. Yes, something stirred. Something long buried started to whisper, "I'm still here." It wasn't that her art was lost. It was buried under practicality. And now she paints again, not for money, but to remember who she is. Life will bury you in shoulds. You should be married by now. You should have kids. You should have a career. And in trying to fit the world's mold, you end up hiding your true self just to survive. But underneath all that pressure, the real you is still intact, waiting, whispering, wanting to rise. One woman was always the strong one, the one everyone leaned on. But she cried in the shower. She silenced her pain. She forgot how to ask for help. Because sacredness doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it's softness. She buried her tenderness to carry others. But strength doesn't mean suffering silently. Real strength is being sacred enough to say, "I need help." A mother had given everything to her family: kids, husband, work, church. But somewhere along the way, she stopped tending to her own soul. She looked in the mirror one day and said, "Who am I outside of being needed?" That question didn't mean she lost herself. It meant she finally heard the buried voice of her sacredness, asking to be seen again. She picked up journaling, started therapy, and for the first time in years did something for her. Not because she was selfish, but because she remembered she was sacred too. There's a woman working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, providing, surviving, pushing through. And she thinks because she's tired, she's failing. But no, she's not failing. She's buried under fatigue, yes, but she's not finished. Her sacredness isn't gone, it's just waiting to be nourished. She's not forgotten. She's fierce. There is sacredness even in her struggle. A woman who was molested at 10 and carried shame like a second skin. She never spoke of it. She thought the silence kept her safe. But really, it kept her sacredness buried. She believed she was broken, but that was the lie. The truth is, her voice didn't disappear. It just went underground, waiting for a safe place to rise. And the moment she told her story, trembling, raw, honest, she felt power she hadn't felt in years. That was her sacredness rising from the rubble. Even in church circles, women bury themselves beneath expectations. Smile, serve, submit. But sacredness isn't performance, it's presence. You were sacred before the dress code, before the doctrine, before the praise team. God didn't call you to hide your power behind politeness. He called you to walk boldly in the divine fire He placed inside you. Let's talk about the woman in corporate who shows up every day in heels and lipstick, running meetings, giving results, being the definition of successful. But when she goes home, she peels off the lashes and the leadership and cries in silence, wondering why she still feels empty. Because her sacredness isn't in the role. It's in the realness. She didn't lose herself. She just buried her under title. But now she's learning to lead with truth, not just tactics. Sometimes sacredness doesn't rise in fire, it rises in fragments, in laughter, in tears, in a journal entry, in a deep breath, in a song you hadn't heard in years that makes you cry for no reason. That's your soul saying, unbury me. There's sacredness in your scars, in your story, in your stillness. You haven't lost it. It's never left you. You just stopped listening. But now, the whispers are getting louder. The whispers come in the stillness, not in the chaos, not in the applause, not in the noise of the crowd or the rush of deadlines, but in the stillness, that quiet space where you finally stop running long enough to hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. It's in the hush after the heartbreak, the pause after the panic, the silence between the storms. That's where sacred whispers begin to echo, not shouting, not demanding, just gentle truth, patiently waiting for you to slow down long enough to hear. There's a woman who spent years chasing success, meetings, emails, goals, a full calendar but an empty heart. She thought fulfillment was in the next promotion. But the higher she climbed, the hollower it felt. One day, she burned out, collapsed at home, with nothing left to give. And in that stillness, not forced, but necessary, she heard it, a whisper. You were never meant to hustle for your worth. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Because the stillness gave her space to hear what the grind had drowned out. Another woman had just gone through a breakup, the kind that knocks the wind out of you. She had given her all and lost herself in the process. Her friends told her to get over it. Social media told her to glow up. But one night, sitting in a room with no music, no scrolling, no pretending, just silence, she heard something deep inside whisper, "You are not unlovable. You are not forgotten." It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. It was holy. The stillness made room for healing. Sometimes the whisper is a memory, the smell of a book your grandmother used to read, the feel of rain on your skin, the sound of a hymn you haven't heard since childhood, and suddenly you remember, there was a time I knew peace. There was a time I felt safe. There was a time I dreamed freely. That whisper is your sacred self saying, let's return. But you can't hear that while rushing. You only catch it in stillness. A woman once told her story of surviving abuse, years of trauma. She became strong, independent, untouchable, but emotionally disconnected. Then she went on a weekend retreat where they took away phones, noise, even talking. At first she panicked, but by the second day, in the absence of distractions, she heard something she hadn't heard in years. Her own voice, shaky, unsure, but alive. The whisper said, "You are more than what happened to you." It wasn't therapy, it wasn't a sermon, it was stillness. And it set her free. A mother of three, constantly pouring out, barely sleeping, once sat on her porch at 5 a.m., coffee in hand, just watching the sun rise. No to-do list, no one asking for anything, just her in the morning. And in that silence, she felt a wave of emotion. Tears fell, not out of sadness, but release. A whisper rose inside her. You are doing better than you think, and you deserve rest too. That was not guilt, that was grace. Stillness delivered what striving never could. Reassurance. Another woman had a dream years ago to open a bakery. Life happened and the dream was shelved. She became a teacher, a wife, a caretaker, and she forgot until one night when the power went out. No Wi-Fi, no Netflix, just candlelight and quiet. She started humming, then writing. Then she pulled out an old recipe notebook. The whisper came, "It's not too late." It didn't shout. It didn't demand. It invited. The dream wasn't dead, just dormant. And the stillness resurrected it. There's a woman who's always on. Social butterfly, group chats, selfies, parties. But at night, when the makeup comes off, she lies awake with anxiety buzzing. One weekend, she turned off her phone for 24 hours just to breathe. One woman sat in her car parked near a lake. No music, no traffic, just water and wind. She had been questioning everything: her marriage, her faith, her identity. She didn't get an answer in the form of thunder, no angelic choir, just a whisper that said, "You are not lost, you are becoming." She didn't need direction, she needed stillness, because it feels like nothing is happening, but that's where everything is happening. Stillness is not inactivity, it's inner activity. Your spirit is speaking, God is whispering. Your healing is humming. Your truth is trembling behind the noise, waiting for you to be still long enough to feel it. In the stillness, there are no masks, no filters. The one who held her tongue even when her heart was breaking. And for years, she shrank herself in the name of keeping the peace, until one day, someone crossed her boundary again, and something in her snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. She stood up and said, "No." No long explanation, no apology, just no. And that single word set her free. Because in that moment, she realized she didn't need permission to protect her peace. She gave herself the green light to reclaim her power. Another woman worked a 9-to-5 job she hated for 12 years. She had dreams, real ones, of becoming a counselor, of writing, of speaking, the one who held her tongue even when her heart was breaking. And for years, she shrank herself in the name of keeping the peace, until one day, someone crossed her boundary again, and something in her snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. She stood up and said, no. No long explanation, no apology, just no. And that single word set her free. Because in that moment, she realized she didn't need permission to protect her peace. She gave herself the green light to reclaim her power. Another woman worked a 9-to-5 job she hated for 12 years. She had dreams, real ones, of becoming a counselor, of writing, of speaking. But every time she brought it up, someone would say, that's not realistic, or you've got a good thing, don't mess it up. And she listened until one quiet afternoon. She was watching a documentary about someone who had overcome so much and finally chased their purpose. She burst into tears, not out of sadness, but recognition. That's when she whispered, if they can do it, so can I. But she signed up for a class, then a certification, then she built a side practice, and now she's doing what sets her soul on fire, not because the world said yes, but because she finally did. You don't need to wait until the kids are grown, until your bank account is full, until your partner understands, or until everything is perfect. Perfect is a prison. Waiting is a trap. Your sacred self is already calling you back home, and you don't need a gatekeeper to say you're allowed. A woman once lived in a body she hated. Every mirror was a battleground. She tried every diet, every detox, every punishment disguised as discipline. Then one day she looked at her daughter, watching her, and realized, if I keep treating myself like this, she will learn to hate herself too. That was the wake-up call. That was the holy fire. So she stood in the mirror the next morning, placed her hand on her belly, her hips, her scars, and said, this body carried me through hell, and she's still here. That was the day she reclaimed her body, not because the world said she was beautiful, but because she decided she already was. There's a woman in a marriage where she feels more like a roommate than a partner. For years, she told herself, this is just how it is. At least he doesn't hit me. At least we're stable. But inside, she was dying. Her dreams wilted. Her laughter muted. Until one day, while folding laundry, a memory flashed of who she used to be. Wild, creative, alive. And she dropped the shirt in her hands and whispered, she's still in there. That moment changed everything. She started journaling again. She picked up painting. She found joy not in leaving the marriage, but in no longer abandoning herself inside of it. You don't need permission to evolve. You don't need to justify your healing. And afterward, a little girl came up and said, I want to be like you. That's when she knew. She didn't need permission, she had purpose. Another woman had buried her creativity under motherhood, under bills, under burnout, until her son brought her an old story she wrote years ago and said, Mom, you should finish this. And something cracked open. She stayed up that night and wrote until 2 a.m. Not for a publisher, not for an audience, for herself. That was the moment she reclaimed her art, not because someone hired her, but because her soul demanded she stop waiting. Sometimes we think reclaiming ourselves is a dramatic act, quitting the job, ending the relationship, leaving the city. But sometimes it's in the small decisions, saying no, saying yes, taking a walk, turning off your phone, sign up for that class, getting back to that hobby, calling yourself by your full name, and remembering who she used to be. There is no committee that votes on your worth, no jury that gets to decide when it's time for you to shine. The only permission you need is the one you give yourself. You are not waiting for the stars to align. You are the alignment. You are not seeking validation. You are the validator. You are not a guest in your own life. You are the homeowner, the architect, the fire and the foundation. Reclaiming you doesn't require an audience. It requires agreement with yourself. And when you finally agree with your own sacredness, everything shifts. The world doesn't have to clap. The universe doesn't need to write it in the sky. The moment you say yes to you, that's when the reclaiming begins. What you survived didn't steal your value. It tried. Oh, it tried. It tried to break you, silence you, dim your light, distort your worth, and convince you that you were nothing more than the wounds you carried. But what you survived didn't define you, it revealed you. Every scar, every tear, every night you thought you wouldn't make it, every day you walked with broken pieces pretending you were whole, none of it diminished your value. I told you, you were not meant to live alone. None of it diminished your value. There's no way you would not be perfect because you are more than a lot of scars. It convinced you that you were worth it. None of it, if anything, it amplified it. There's a woman who was abandoned by her father as a child. She grew up wondering what was wrong with her, why she wasn't worth staying for. She kept choosing people who left, friends who used her, partners who ghosted her. She built her identity around rejection until one day she sat with a therapist who said, "You're not hard to love, you were just loved poorly." That hit her soul like thunder. And from that moment on, she began to unlearn the lie that she was less than. Her survival wasn't a badge of shame, it was a crown of resilience. Another woman escaped an abusive relationship. For years, she thought, if I was stronger, I would have left sooner. She carried guilt like a second skin. Until one afternoon, she heard a speaker say, "Don't shame yourself for the way you survived. Celebrate that you did." That one sentence shattered her inner critic. She realized survival wasn't weakness, it was strength disguised as endurance. A woman was shamed for her past, choices she made when she didn't know better, when she was hurting, when she was just trying to survive. People wouldn't let her forget. But one day she looked in the mirror and declared, "I am not who I was. I am who I chose to become." She stopped letting other people's memory of her become her prison. She reclaimed her name Her narrative, her worth, her mistakes were not her identity. Her redemption was louder than her regret. Another woman struggled with infertility. Baby showers were painful. Mother's Day felt like a spotlight on her empty arms. She felt broken, less than. Until one quiet night, sitting on her couch, she whispered through tears. She remembers the day a stranger looked at her with pity and said, "You poor thing." And she stood tall and replied, "Don't pity me. I'm a warrior in the middle of my victory." Because even though her body was weak, her spirit was on fire. She learned to see her survival not as a burden, but as a battle cry. Her body had been through war, but her worth never wavered. There's a woman who grew up in poverty, hand-me-down clothes, empty refrigerators, lights turned off. She carried shame for years, thinking success was for people like them and not people like me. Then one day in a college lecture hall, she heard a professor say, "Your zip code didn't decide your destiny." And that truth broke every generational curse still whispering in her ear. She stopped seeing herself as less than. She saw herself as proof that diamonds are formed under pressure. Her past didn't rob her of value. It revealed the depth of her strength. People wouldn't let her forget. But one day she looked in the mirror and declared, "I am not who I was, I am who I chose to become." She stopped letting other people's memory of her become her prison. She reclaimed her name, her narrative, her worth. Her mistakes were not her identity. Her redemption was louder than her regret. Another woman struggled with infertility. Baby showers were painful. Mother's Day felt like a spotlight on her empty arms. She felt broken, less than, until one quiet night sitting on her couch, she whispered through tears, "I'm still whole." Because she realized her ability to nurture wasn't limited to a biological child. She was a mother in her heart, to students, to friends, to nieces, to herself. Her body hadn't failed. It had fought. And her worth was never tied to what it could or could not produce. It was inherent. There's a woman who lived through addiction. She lost time, opportunities, relationships. But she found recovery. She found clarity. She found herself. And the world tried to remind her of her past. But she wore her sobriety like armor. She told her story not with shame, but with pride. If you only knew what I had to fight through to sit here sober, you'd stand up and clap. Her survival didn't stain her. It sanctified her. What she went through didn't cheapen her worth. It added weight to her wisdom. Survival is not something to be ashamed of. It's not a stain. It's not proof of failure. It's the evidence that you refused to quit. That even when your hope was bleeding, you kept walking. Even when you were doubted, dismissed, or discarded, you kept breathing, rising. The value in you was never up for negotiation. Not after the divorce, not after the trauma, not after the breakdown. You are not a discounted version of who you used to be. You are the upgraded version of who survived. Every battle left you with something, strength. Some days she wrote, "I don't want to be here." Other days, "I think I'm finding my way back." That journal became her sanctuary. No filter, no pretending, just truth. And through that truth, healing seeped in. Quiet, slow, but sure. Another woman who had body image issues since her teens began the process of healing her relationship with herself. It didn't start with loving her body. It started with not hating it. She stopped stepping on the scale. She stopped following toxic social media accounts. She started thanking her body for what it did instead of hating it for what it wasn't. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror and said, "Thank you, legs, for carrying me. Thank you, belly, for protecting me. Thank you, arms, for hugging those I love." But it was powerful because healing often starts with a whisper, not a roar. One day she said no, firmly, unapologetically. No to plans, no to extra work, no to being available when her soul was exhausted. She felt guilty at first, but then came the relief, the liberation, the sacred fire of boundaries. That's healing too. Choosing yourself even when the world expects you to shrink. Another woman healing from religious trauma decided to find God in her own way. She had been told she wasn't enough, that she was too loud, too free, too bold. But the God she met in her quiet moments didn't shame her. He embraced her. She walked away from the performance of religion and into the presence of truth. Healing her faith didn't look like going back to church. It looked like sitting under a tree, feeling the wind on her face and saying, "You never left me. I just had to unlearn what they told me about you." It was raw. It was real. It was hers. Healing doesn't always look like rising. Sometimes it looks like resting. Sometimes it looks like falling apart in safe places. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm not okay," and letting that be enough. It's not linear. It doesn't follow a schedule. But every tear you cry, every trigger you confront, every truth you speak, they're not signs of weakness. They're proof that you are no longer hiding from your healing. You're leaning into it, messy and magnificent. You won't always recognize the power in the middle of the process, but trust, every crack is letting the light in. Every scar is sacred ground. And though healing may not be pretty, it is the path back to your own soul. Sacred women speak life, not just with words, but with presence. When a sacred woman enters a room, she doesn't have to raise her voice. Her spirit speaks before her mouth does. She carries a frequency that disrupts despair, that awakens forgotten purpose, that calls dead dreams back to life. Sacred women don't just talk, they declare. They don't echo noise. Their words are not small talk, they are soul talk. They don't gossip, they prophesy. They don't curse the storm, they command peace. There's a woman who works as a nurse in the night shift. She sees pain, fear, and loss up close every single day. but she never lets what she sees determine what she speaks. A patient once said, "I'm not going to make it." She knelt by his bed, held his hand, and said, "You don't have to believe for a miracle. I'll believe for you." Those words shifted the air in that room. And 2 weeks later, that same man walked out of that hospital. Sacred women know that the tongue holds life and death, and they always choose life. There's a mother raising daughters in a world that constantly tells them they're not enough, not skinny enough, not enough skin, not quiet enough, not pretty enough. But every morning before school, she looks her girls in the eyes and says, "You are powerful. You are chosen. You are more than enough. This world better be ready for you." And because she speaks life into them, they walk with fire in their bones. She's rewriting legacies with every sentence. Sacred women raise warriors, not worriers. But this teacher, this sacred woman, pulled him aside and said, "I see you. You are not a mistake. You're brilliant. Don't let the noise outside drown out the voice inside." That student went from hiding in the back of the class to standing tall in front of it. Because one voice that speaks life can drown out 100 that speak defeat. There's a woman who runs a small business, barely scraping by. She battles imposter syndrome, exhaustion, and constant comparison, but she walks into her store every day, flips the sign to open, and says out loud, "This is holy ground. My dream lives here. My legacy breathes here." She speaks life even when profit is low, even when doubt creeps in. Because sacred women build with belief. They don't wait for signs to speak faith. They create signs by speaking faith. A woman in her 60s has seen many chapters: love and loss, health and sickness, joy and grief. People look at her and say, "You're so strong." But what they don't know is that her strength comes from what she speaks over herself every morning. She looks in the mirror and whispers, "God's not done with me yet. I still got oil in my jar. I still got fire in my soul." She doesn't age. She anoints, because sacred women know that power doesn't fade with time. It deepens. There's a friend group where one woman is struggling silently. She hasn't said much, but her glow is dimming. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. And while others laugh around her, one sacred woman notices. She leans in and says, "I don't know what you're carrying, but I see you. I still believe in you. You're not just a woman. You're a womb of nations. You're not just flesh and bone. You're destiny wrapped in skin. You carry more than children. You carry movements, revolutions, miracles, and mantles. You birth ideas that shift atmospheres. You birth strength in storms. You birth answers to prayers whispered across generations. Every time you show up, every time you speak truth, every time you love fiercely, you're releasing something divine. You don't just wake up, you emerge. You don't just survive, you establish. Your existence is proof that God still breathes through women. There's a woman running a small kitchen out of her home. She's not on magazine covers. She's not invited to luxury events. She's breaking poverty patterns. She's rewriting the story her bloodline was handed. She's creating employment, opportunity, and empowerment. Her hustle is holy. Her ideas are incubators. Her grind is not about clout, it's about impact. She's a womb of generational transformation. There's a woman who has walked through abuse, betrayal, loss, and lived. She shouldn't be here, but she is, with scars that now shine like armor. She speaks to other women from her wounds, not her wins. She tells them, you can get back up. Your story doesn't end here. I've walked through fire and I came out with gold. She is birthing hope from heartbreak. She's not just surviving, she's serving life to those who are still bleeding. When a woman finally hears the whisper of her worth, it becomes a roar that shakes everything around her. It is not a quiet ending. It is the beginning of a divine uprising. Let them call you too much. Let them say you're too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, too strong. Because too much for them is just right for purpose. You weren't made to fit into their box. You were born to break it. The same hands that were once trembling in silence are now the hands that are lifting generations. You are not the wounds that tried to break you. You are not the labels they placed on your back when you didn't have the words to fight back. You are not the mistakes, the shame, the silence. You are the phoenix in the ashes. You are the rose that grew from concrete. You are the lioness who forgot how to roar, but now she remembers. Now she remembers who she is. Let the world brace itself, because when a woman reclaims her sacred self, mountains move, chains break, and nations rise. You've been told to wait for permission to lead. But hear me now. You don't need their seat at the table. You are the table. You are the table. You are the table. You don't need their script. You carry your own scroll. You don't need validation from people who never had vision for your value. Your playing small does not serve the world, said Marianne Williamson. And she was right. There is nothing holy about hiding. You are not arrogant for shining. You are answering a call that's been echoing through your bones since birth. Remember this. Every time you stand up for yourself, you stand up for the ones watching you in silence. Every time you speak your truth, you give someone else the courage to find their voice. Every time you get back up, bruised but not broken, you prophesy survival to someone who thinks they can't make it. Your healing is not just about you, it's about the ripple effect. You heal and your daughters inherit peace. You rise and your lineage learns how to soar.